Some men dream of mountains. Others dream of the sea. Carl dreamed of horses. Not one or two horses kept behind a modest fence on a rented acre. No, Carl dreamed of dozens of them, massive, breathtaking animals with muscles rippling beneath their coats, hooves thundering across open fields that belonged to him and no one else. He wanted the smell of hay in the morning, the sound of wind cutting through a wooden barn at night, the feeling of standing at the center of something he had built with his own two hands. It was, by most measures, a beautiful dream.
The problem was that Carl worked at a sheet metal shop in California. He was good at the job, efficient and punctual, the kind of man his boss never had to call twice. But sheet metal wages don't buy farms. They buy groceries and car payments, and if you're lucky, a small vacation every few years. By the time Carl turned 30 in the late 1980s, he had a wife, 3 young children, a modest house, and a dream that felt more distant every single year. He should have found a way to let it go. He didn't. It was a Tuesday evening in 1990 when Carl first allowed the idea to fully form in his mind, not as a passing dark thought, the kind every frustrated person entertains and then discards with a shake of the head, but as an actual plan, something with steps, something with a beginning, middle, and a very deliberate end. His wife, Christina, was washing dishes when he watched her from the doorway. She was humming something soft, her dark hair pinned loosely at the back of her neck. $200,000, he thought. He had done the research. A life insurance policy on a spouse was straightforward to obtain. Nobody asked too many questions. And $200,000? That was enough. Enough for land upstate. Enough for a proper barn. Enough for horses. He told himself he had no choice. He told himself the math just didn't work any other way. He went behind Christina's back and quietly took out a $200,000 life insurance policy in her name. She never knew. She was still humming in the kitchen, still trusting, still completely unaware that the man she had married was drawing up the architecture of her death. Months passed. Carl was patient. He had to be. It wasn't until 1991 that he decided the time was right. On the day he chose, Christina was home in the afternoon while the kids were at school. Carl moved through the house with the quiet, mechanical calm of a man who has rehearsed something 100 times in his head. First, he checked the bathroom window, the one Christina used when she took her afternoon bath. Days earlier, he had pressed a sheet of plywood against it from the outside, sealing it shut. She hadn't noticed. He waited until he heard the water running. Then he moved carefully to the hallway just outside the bathroom door. He gripped the back of a heavy wooden dresser and pushed it, inch by inch, until it was flush against the door. Locked from the outside, unmovable by a person pushing from within. He went to the garage and found the kerosene. He poured it across the hallway floor, a long, dark river of it, right in front of the bathroom. Then, he struck a match. The flame caught instantly, racing along the floor, and Carl stepped back and watched it for just a moment before his face rearranged itself into something that looked like horror. He ran to the front of the house, shouting for the kids. He grabbed them, 1, 2, 3, and ushered them out the front door onto the grass. Neighbors were already appearing on their porches, drawn by the smell of smoke rising from the eaves. "Christina!" Carl shouted, running back toward the front door as the flames spread through the hallway. "Christina!" He stepped inside, made a show of trying to push through, then stumbled back out coughing. "I can't get to her," he told a neighbor who had rushed to help. Inside, behind the blocked door, Christina was screaming. She slammed her palms against the wood. She tried the window she had no reason to believe was sealed, and found it wouldn't budge, The smoke came under the door first, thin ribbons of it, and then thicker, darker waves. She died in that bathroom. When the fire department arrived and the house was brought under control, investigators walked through the ruins. They found no accelerant, or if they did, they didn't know what to make of it. The dresser had burned. The window's plywood covering had burned. The fire, they concluded, was an accident. A tragic, devastating accident. Carl stood outside in the ash-gray afternoon light, his 3 children clinging to him, his face arranged in grief. He had gotten away with it. 4 days after Christina's funeral, Carl packed his children into a car and drove across the country to New York State. He didn't look back. Years have a way of moving quickly when you're building towards something. Carl rebuilt his life in New York. He worked, he saved, and he waited. He remarried a woman named Cindy, who was warm and trusting and knew nothing of California fires or blocked bathroom doors or plywood nailed over windows. By 2001, Carl had used a significant portion of Christina's life insurance money to finally do what he had always planned to do. He bought the farm. It wasn't glamorous, a working property with weathered fencing and an old barn that needed some repairs, but it was his. And shortly after moving in, he bought his first Belgian draft horses. If you've never seen a Belgian draft horse up close, they are extraordinary animals. They stand nearly 6 feet at the shoulder. Their legs are like tree trunks wrapped in feathered fur. They have patient, intelligent eyes and an almost impossible gentleness given their size. Carl bought several of them and began breeding them with the seriousness of a man who had spent a decade imagining this exact moment. For a while, things were good. But then came 2002. The Belgian draft horse business, it turned out, was not as profitable as Carl had imagined. The money from Christina's policy had drained away over the years. Living expenses, the farm purchase, equipment, feed. Carl found himself standing in his barn one autumn morning, looking at his horses with the same cold calculation he had once directed at his wife. Insurance, he thought. He insured the horses. He waited a few months so as not to raise suspicion. And then, one night, he set his own barn on fire with his animals inside it. 3 of the horses didn't make it out. Carl watched the barn burn from a safe distance and felt nothing. Or if he felt something, he swallowed it down before it could surface. The investigators came. They ruled it an accident. The payout arrived, approximately $115,000. Carl used the money to restock. He bought more horses. He kept going. By the mid-2000s, Carl had a stepson, Cindy's boy, Levi, who had come to live on the farm. Levi was a young man, quiet and hardworking, the kind of kid who got up early without being asked and knew how to make himself useful around a property. He trusted Carl. That would turn out to be his great misfortune. Carl's finances had collapsed again. The farm was struggling. The horse operation wasn't pulling enough income, and the bills kept stacking up. Carl had begun to look at the people around him the way a chess player looks at pieces, not as human beings with lives and futures, but as variables in a problem he needed to solve. He had taken out a life insurance policy on Levi. The amount was staggering, close to $700,000. The plan, this time, involved the old farm truck. Carl identified a day when he knew Levi would be working underneath it, a routine maintenance job. Before the young man got started, Carl quietly positioned a jack beneath the chassis, and then, with deliberate care, made sure the jack was unstable. Just unstable enough. When Levi crawled under the truck that afternoon, and the jack shifted, and the vehicle came down, there was no one nearby to help. He died at the scene. The investigation that followed found no immediate evidence of foul play. Farm accidents happened. equipment failed. The death was ruled accidental.
Carl collected $700,000. He bought tractors. He bought a new truck. He started a duck operation, purchasing a large flock and selling the meat to local restaurants. From the outside, Carl looked like a grieving stepfather who had managed, with quiet resilience, to keep his farm running through tragedy. Inside, he was doing arithmetic. Cindy had been trying not to think certain thoughts for a long time. She had told herself that Levi's death was just a terrible accident. Farm life was dangerous. She knew that going in. She had told herself that the timing, the insurance policy, the payout, Carl's almost immediate pivot back to farm business was just Carl being practical, being the kind of man who dealt with grief by working through it. But there were too many accidents now. She had heard, through careful conversations with Carl's adult children from his first marriage, about Christina, about the California fire, about how quickly Carl had left after the funeral, how he had taken out an insurance policy on her without her knowledge. His kids didn't use the word murder out loud. None of them could quite bring themselves to. But the implication hung in every sentence like smoke. Cindy went to a private investigator. What the PI found made her sit down and go completely still.
Carl had taken out life insurance policies on Cindy, totaling approximately $1.2 million. She was next. She went to the police with shaking hands and a folder full of documents, and she told them everything. She told them about Levi. She told them what she knew about Christina. She told them about the policies. The detective who sat across from her listened carefully and then leaned back in his chair with a long exhale. "We can't arrest him for taking out an insurance policy," he said. "It's not illegal on its own." "Then what do we do?" Cindy asked. The sting operation took weeks to set up. Cindy was fitted with a wire, a small flat recording device tucked beneath her clothes, and coached on how to guide the conversation without seeming like she was guiding it. They chose a local restaurant, neutral ground, a Tuesday afternoon, the lunch crowd thinning out. Carl was already at the table when she arrived, nursing a coffee. He looked up and smiled at her, the same smile she had once found warm and reassuring. She sat down and ordered water. They made small talk for a while. The farm, the ducks, the weather coming in from the north. And then carefully, methodically, Cindy turned the conversation toward Levi. "I've been thinking about him a lot lately," she said, keeping her voice soft and even. "About the accident." Carl wrapped both hands around his coffee mug. Best not to dwell on it.
"I know. I keep wondering if there was something we could have done differently. Whether the truck was safe." She paused. "Whether the jack was properly set up." A silence. Then Carl said, quietly, "It wasn't." Cindy kept her breathing steady. "What do you mean?" "I mean, I set it up the way I needed to set it up." He didn't say it with remorse. He said it the way a man might describe a repair job he'd completed, matter-of-factly, almost bored. He went on to explain in plain terms how he had positioned the jack, how he had known what would happen, how he had made sure the insurance paperwork was in order beforehand. Cindy looked at her husband across the table and realized she was sitting with a man who had killed at least 3 people and a barn full of horses, and felt, as far as she could tell, essentially nothing about any of it. She nodded. She sipped her water. She kept the conversation going for another 20 minutes before making an excuse to leave. The squad cars pulled up to the duck farm on a gray morning, 2 of them moving slowly up the dirt driveway. Carl was out near the water troughs, scattering feed, when he heard the gravel crunching and turned. He saw the uniforms and went very still. "Carl," one of the officers said, stepping forward, "we need you to come with us." He didn't run. He didn't argue. He set down the feed bucket with a kind of eerie calm and walked toward them with his hands already raised slightly at his sides, as if he had been half expecting this moment and had decided, somewhere in the back of his mind, to meet it without fuss. He was charged with the murder of Levi. At trial, the recordings Cindy had made, his own voice, his own words, spoken over coffee in a restaurant booth, were played for the jury. There was no explaining them away. He had described what he'd done in precise detail, unprompted, to the woman he had planned to kill next. Carl took a plea deal. He was sentenced to 15 years to life.
The farm was sold. The horses were dispersed to new owners. The ducks, reportedly, went to a neighboring property and continued to be ducks, which is the kind of detail that feels almost absurd against the backdrop of everything else. Carl's 3 children from his first marriage, now adults, finally had an answer to the question that had shadowed their entire lives. What had really happened to their mother in that bathroom in California in 1991? They had suspected for years. Now they knew. Cindy, the woman who had been brave enough to wear a wire and sit across a table from a killer, quietly rebuilt her life away from the farm and away from Carl. And the horses, those enormous, patient, beautiful Belgian drafts that had been at the center of all of it, they went on existing, which is all horses ever really do.
They didn't know that men had died for them. They didn't know that a barn had burned and a woman had screamed behind a sealed window and a young man had been crushed under a truck, all in service of someone's dream of owning them. They just kept being horses. There's something worth sitting with in that. Carl wanted something so badly that he was willing to destroy everyone around him to get it. He wanted the farm. He wanted the animals. He wanted the life. And for a while, for years actually, he had it. He stood on that land. He watched those horses move across the field. He had gotten everything he wanted. It just cost him everything he had. Some dreams are worth chasing at any price. This one wasn't. If you made it to the end of this story, share it with someone who loves true crime. And remember, the most dangerous people are often the ones with the most ordinary dreams.